country, thus ending 24 years of his rule and 53 years of his family's rule. It's indeed the start of a new chapter in Syria. We'll discuss that in detail. But first, how did Damascus fall? When we last spoke...
And the invitation is still open, Dave, if you want to come up. Like I said, if not, like I said, it's all good, brother. It's all good.
The rebels were in Hama, around 200 kilometers from the capital. After taking the city of Hama, they marched towards Homs. It's a city north of Damascus, sort of like a gateway to the Syrian capital. The regime soldiers did not put up much of a fight. They were underpaid and under-equipped, so most of them simply surrendered. A few even joined the rebel ranks. Soon celebrations broke out in Homs. The rebels fired their guns into the air. Statues and portraits of Assad and his family were attacked. Take a look.
Man, we're in jubilation right now. They're going crazy.
Homs was captured on Saturday. By then, the picture was becoming clear. The rebel leader released a message on social media. His name is Abu Muhammad al-Julani. He leads an Islamist rebel group called HTS, the same group that led this offensive. Al-Julani set his eyes on Damascus after Homs. Rebel forces said that they had encircled the capital city of Syria. The stage was set for a final standoff, but it wasn't even needed. Because in Damascus, the sentiment was firmly anti-Assad. The city was in no mood to fight, so the soldiers simply surrendered. Late on Saturday, the rebels began entering the capital. Around the same time, Assad hopped on his plane and fled to Russia. By morning, the takeover was complete. The rebels appeared in front of Syrian state television. They declared that Damascus had fallen. So who's in charge now? On paper, the Prime Minister of Syria, he is the one who's in charge. The rebels have asked him to keep running the government. Once a transition plan is ready, he will step aside. That's the assumption right now. But the immediate worry is stability, getting a grip on things in Damascus and beyond. That's what they need to do first. On Sunday, rebel fighters stormed Assad's presidential palace. They looted his belongings and destroyed his family portraits. They also found his garage. It had for...
And then, bro, they was going crazy. I mean, they was still in designer bags and everything off this man. I'm like, yep, this makes sense. This sounds like the fall of a regime.
Ferraris, Aston Martins, Bentleys, and Rolls Royces.
I knew it. I knew they had to take the cars too. I was like, oh yeah, he got him through. He couldn't take anything with him. He's out there hiding out in Russia. Well, I guess the people's taking back their tax dollars.
دراج حبيبي نحن ما لنا بدبي نحن بكراج الحمار.
My man was whipping.
نحن ما لنا بدبي.
The rebels also went for the prisons. Assad had
Assad, he has some whips. All right.
Jailed a lot of critics in the last decade. Reports say around 100,000 people have disappeared or been jailed since 2011. The rebels tried to free them. One of their main targets was the S.E.T prison. It's located on the outskirts of Damascus. It's often called the human slaughterhouse. That's how brutal it is. The rebels took control of this facility and they released the prisoners. Some of them could be seen roaming the streets later.
الله أكبر 10 سنين الله أكبر مساجين يحيى
Wow.
الله أكبر سقط النظام.
Okay, maybe he was as bad as they say he was. Because what? Locking up people, damn near called a death camp. And it was funny because when they was going through one of his other prisons, bro, they were literally like releasing, like, bro, there's little kids walking out of cells, groups of women rushing out of one of the cells. I was like, yeah, what did this man have going on? And shout out Mr. Doc, who said, now this was an insurrection. Yes, this is an insurrection. Drill it in your mind. Syria, this is an insurrection, not January 6th. Thank you, Mr. Doc Hill.
Most Syrians are thrilled by Assad's ouster, and it's obvious why. Around 70% of the country lives in poverty, around 26% have no jobs, and 30% are displaced. There is no freedom, no livelihood, and no peace. So Syrians were relieved by Sunday's news. We saw celebrations across the country. So Syrians are thrilled. What about the rest of the world? US President Joe Biden hailed Assad's ouster. He called it a fundamental act of justice. Europe and Britain are also on the same page. They have welcomed the regime change in Damascus. So has Turkey. President Erdogan says there is a new political reality in Syria. And the Arab nations? Same thing. Assad was an ally of the Iranian regime. So the Arab capitals are fine with his ouster. But all these countries are worried about one question. What happens next?
The Iranian regime? Okay, so it makes sense why he ran to Russia. Okay.
Is the civil
Even
war
even
truly
more sense.
over? Well, that depends on three factors. For starters, the Syrian rebels are not one homogeneous group. There are different tribes, different religious sects, and different ideologies. They did unite to oust Bashar al-Assad, but will they stick together during the transition, or will they bicker over power sharing? That's one question. Secondly, what role will the Kurds play? The Kurdish groups control most of northeast Syria. They don't have a good relationship with Islamist rebels. So will the Kurds be sidelined? And if so, will they fight back? Which brings us to the final factor, the nature of future regime. Assad's rule was largely secular, but the rebels are hardcore Islamists. He mentioned HTS and Julani. Julani used to fight for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. He may talk about tolerance now, but let's see how he rules if he comes to power. The fact is...
And shout out Chantrell Galloway. We appreciate the support, sis. And shout out with the $2 super chat. Appreciate you. And she had too much to say. She just wanted to show some support. All right, let's go right back to it.
Predict anything. We've seen similar scenes in countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya. Long-time regimes and rulers toppled in lightning offensives. In Afghanistan, the Taliban have consolidated power, so the war is over. In Iraq, there is no political stability, and in Libya, there is still a civil war. So it's a question of which way Syria goes. Right now, there is a political vacuum in the country. The key is to fill that rapidly, to chart a quick roadmap for the future. If not, the world has bad memories from instability in Syria. Last time it led to the rise of ISIS. They set up a caliphate in Syria and Iraq. They plotted terror attacks across the world. That remains the biggest worry for the world right now, a repeat of that chaos. Syria's location is very important. It borders Turkey, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, Iraq.
And I'm real with you. One of Syria's biggest gripe, or one of the jihadists' biggest gripe in Syria is, well, the Golan Heights, which used to be a part of, I think, Lebanon or Syria. And this is one of the main reasons why, well, really, Israel is such a target to all of these countries, because it just seems to, I don't know, magically expands out of nowhere.
It is also home to foreign forces from Russia, from Iran, and from the US. So what happens there affects all these countries. And what about India? Well, New Delhi has called for unity in Syria. It also demanded a peaceful and inclusive political process. But frankly, this is not ideal for India. Bashar al-Assad was a long-time partner of New Delhi. He supported India's positions on Kashmir, including the 2019 decision to rescind the special status, to scrap Article 370. The next regime in Damascus may not be so understanding. India also has commercial interests in Syria. In 2009, it agreed to fund a thermal power plant. A loan of $240 million was promised. Some Indian companies are also involved in the oil industry. Combined investments are about $350 million. As I said, India would have liked a political settlement, one where Assad was still involved. But there isn't enough at stake to keep New Delhi awake at night. Now, I know it's celebration time in Damascus, but it should also be a period of caution, because uncertainty is looming over Syria. Only time will tell if this revolution succeeds.
Ain't that the truth? I mean, yeah, let's see how it all plays out. Because hey, it's like it's the next new conflict. Will we be throwing money into it? Well, I hope not. I mean, I really hope not. I'll be quite upset if we find another conflict to throw money into and then say, oh, we should help our people, or we should help these guys get rid of Russian influence, because Russia do have military bases down there. So it does make a little bit of sense. I'm not even gonna lie.
Syria's dictator. He's now in exile.
The Assad regime has collapsed. The president, gone.
Bashar al-Assad is no longer Syria's dictator. He's now in exile in Moscow.
As rebels moved into the Syrian capital of Damascus.
Rebel forces launched a devastating series of attacks from their tiny stronghold of Idlib province.
And shout out Big Wave Dave. He said, okay, this will likely be my last. You all need to understand these countries don't want democracy. Stop trying to spread it. When we interfere and try to change regimes, you just create a vacuum and make more problems. There's no simple solution for this. It's the same every damn time. And I'm gonna be real with you, Big Wave Dave. I was making the same point. I was like, we just can't go out there and spread democracy or a constitutional republic. These people got to pick it up on their own. Every time we interfere, things get worse, or we just abuse them for their resources. So the only way to really help these people is to, leave them alone and leave us out of their conflicts, because they got to come to this themselves. I remember the main argument I was saying that, we take away the George Washingtons, the revolutionaries of other countries, and bring them here and they become CEOs and wealthy, and that's great and all, but we've taken opportunity away from an entire country to find possibly the same democracy. I'm sorry, but the same constitutional republic that we got, possibly, but we just F it up for them every time we come in there and we interfere with their problems. So shout out Big Wave Day, man. Appreciate that.
Marching east into Aleppo.
Man, hopefully we can still see you around here, man. You know we love you here at S.E.T Media.
Then south to Hama, through Homs, and finally to Damascus. And they did it in less than 2 weeks. I'll show you how. Now, first things first, we've done our best to understand this story based on a whole range of sources, from experts we've spoken to, from other media, from human rights groups, and from Syrians who are on the ground, living the conflict in real time. Not all of it we can independently verify ourselves. And where that's the case, I'll do my best to make that clear. But this was one of the earliest moments that the world saw just what was unfolding.
Shout out Mr. Doc Hill. Come back, Big Wave Dave. I'm like, come on, man. Like, hey, the Discord misses you. What can I say?
In that clip, we see a man praying by a statue in a town rebel groups claimed to have conquered. The cameraman is saying roughly, Anjara is ours. Now, I should say, this is unverified video posted late last month by a freelance journalist who's covering the conflict. But those coordinates take us here, where we can see that statue from above, and that this is indeed in the heart of Anjara. The city matters because it was the front doorstep of what would become the opposition forces' first major victory, where the world would be reintroduced to a rebel group called Hayat
Tahrir al-Sham.
Hayat Tahrir al-Sham.
Or HTS for short.
HTS.
Known as HTS.
For years, HTS forces had been marshalling in Idlib province, considered the last remaining opposition stronghold against Assad's regime in the country. Until they pushed east. Cities like Kaptan al-Jabal and Anjara were among the first to fall. HTS and its allies claimed to capture at least 13 villages, as well as a Syrian army base in about a day. Within the next 24 hours, we began to see reports of rebels capturing not just land, but weapons. This Syrian rebel group commander posted on November 28th. During our operations, we were able to seize 12 tanks, 2 BMP vehicles. Those are Russian armored infantry vehicles, 6 machine guns, mortars, and anti-tank missiles. Now, it's impossible for us to verify any of those claims, but one day later, those opposition forces would breach the western limits of Aleppo, their first major prize of the offensive. Government forces reportedly fled. By evening Friday, November 29th, CNN reported that the city center had fallen, and rebel forces grew even stronger, continuing to claim Syrian army weapons as their own. We haven't been able to independently verify that video, but I'll explain what it claims to show. It was posted by the head of the Middle East Institute's Syria program, based in Washington. And those weapons, he claims, are man-portable rocket launchers meant to shoot down planes. Because at this point, you might be wondering, how did rebel forces advance so quickly and successfully? And where was the Syrian National Army? Well, there was an attempt to fight back. As rebels broke into Aleppo, Russian planes, an ally of Syria, dropped bombs on Idlib, the rebels' home base. This is the aftermath of an airstrike on a hospital. Several others were hit too, including a maternity hospital. But Russia has been in no position to fully commit to a defense of Syria because it's busy fighting a war in Ukraine. Iran is another close ally of Syria, but its major proxy, Hezbollah, has been decimated by Israel in its war against Hamas.
And so the Iranians really weren't very willing to put their own troops on the ground to back the Assad regime.
And this weakened backbone of defense would continue to show glaring cracks as opposition forces marched south. The M5 highway in Syria goes a long way in literally connecting the dots of how rebels eventually broke the Assad government. It connects Aleppo, which opposition forces had just conquered, to Hama in the south, then further to Homs, and finally to Syria's capital of Damascus. Hama is where the Syrian army would attempt to draw a line. On December 1st, as rebels pushed south, Syria's defense minister announced that a large group of reinforcements would bolster a defensive position just north of that city. Around this time, Syria's close ally, Iran, claims it was coordinating with Russia to decide how to help. According to some local media, the three countries would agree on a series of phone calls that something had to be done to counter what they called the spread of terrorism. But that help was either slow to come, ineffective, or both. Because over the next several days, rebel forces, by this point, a coalition of different groups, all seizing the moment, they pushed deep into Hama.
Releasing prisoners, it says, were wrongly detained from the city's main prison.
By this point, it was starting to become clear that opposition forces had a kind of unstoppable momentum. Pro-opposition media posted this footage, reportedly, but unverifiably, showing a convoy of HT.
You know what's so crazy? America will stay out of this as long as Syria don't mess with Israel. I mean, yeah, as long as Syria don't mess with Israel, which is, I'm going to be real with you, kind of looking unlikely due to jihadist rule. So we'll see how that works out. But if they don't F with Israel, they might be all right. They just might be all right.
TS coalition fighters preparing to travel south on the M5 highway from Hama to Homs, which you can think of as the gateway to the capital, Damascus.
It's the third largest city in Syria, and it's positioned right along a strategic highway which goes north and south, and basically would have made it impossible to continue to supply Syrian military forces and components to the west.
Many experts saw losing Homs as the start of a death spiral for the Assad regime. It is the site of a key oil refinery, a major economic hub, and, as you heard, a connection point to the coast. It would also appear to have been the last shred of hope for defenders of Bashar al-Assad. Because as Homs fell, rebels called on regime soldiers to defect.
والانشقاق عن هذه العصابة التي ربطت مصير شعب بأكمله بمصير أفراد العائلة الحاكمة وإلا فانتظروا مصيركم.
It's impossible to know how many did, but they did run. Iran flew their officers out. And by the time opposition forces began their final push for Damascus itself, there was effectively nobody left to stop them. They seized the capital unopposed. Bashar al-Assad, the man who ruled Syria with an iron fist, had disappeared.
It was clear that the security forces and the Syrian regime's military forces were simply washed away. And it created a further constraint and obstacle for security forces to control large crowds.
The Syrian army had no stomach for this fight. They defected, they had surrendered, they retreated.
In the end, there were at least three big reasons Assad's regime fell. It was weak without its allies. It was up against a coalition of forces who appeared to coordinate, at least on some level. And it was unpopular.
The Syrian regime has been in power for 50 years, and yet it fell. I can tell you that the moment we are living today, freedom of the Assad regime, it's worth all the pain, all the suffering, all the fear, all the disappointment, all the betrayal. It's worth everything.
But a much more difficult question to answer now is what or who takes Bashar al-Assad's place? HTS, which led the rebellion, is a jihadi group with roots in al-Qaeda. For years, it has been labeled a terrorist group by the US, the EU, and the UN. That might change now, given what's happened. But it's anyone's guess what happens next.
And shout out CBS. That was actually pretty good. But all right, now let's get to what Trump might actually be doing about this, because it says that Trump wants China to help end Russia and Ukraine war, and possibly they're trying to say lead into the Syrian war. But honestly, I think everybody's going to leave Syria alone. I think we should all leave Syria alone. But let's get into Trump's war plans, or not even war plans, but war avoidance plans. And we also got the conspiracy hour coming up next. Huh. I love it. And Zelensky right there, immediate ceasefire in Ukraine. Love it. Because now we just need to go ahead and get to the negotiation table and knock that out. And then, you know what that means? Taxpayer dollars will not go towards Ukraine no more. Now, they may try to find something else to do it, but at least it ain't Ukraine. Because I'm tired of our money going towards Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, just places that, Japan, places that we get no benefit in, but we just, spend money, send soldiers just to support people who don't support us back.
Now let's look at another diplomatic display, one that could reshape Europe. Donald Trump just paid a visit to France and dropped another bombshell. He wants China's help to end the war in Ukraine. So what exactly is he proposing? And what was he doing in France in the first place? Let me answer the second question first. Trump was in Paris for the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral. The cathedral was gutted by a fire in 2019. It was repaired over the last few years and finally reopened on Saturday. French President Emmanuel Macron held a grand ceremony for it. He invited leaders from all over the world, including Donald Trump, who is still technically a private citizen. He hasn't taken office yet, but Macron invited him because talking to Trump was important as soon as possible. So Trump was given a grand welcome at the Élysée Palace in Paris. That's the French presidential palace. Macron and Trump hugged and shook hands multiple times. and quite fiercely.
If I was Macron, I wouldn't want to do a photo ops with Biden. I mean, bro, he try to dap up Biden. Biden done fell all over himself. I'm like, you try to shake hand with Biden. I'm gonna be real with you. He might have crushed Biden's hands.
It's an old habit of theirs. They did this during Trump's last presidency as well. It seems some things never change.
President, I just say it's a great honor for French people to welcome you 5 years later. And you were at that time present for the first time. And I remember the solidarity and your immediate reaction. So welcome back again.
Thank you
We
very
are
much.
very happy to have you here.
Thank you. And it's an honor to be here. We had a good time together, and we had a lot of success, really great success working together on defense and offense too. And it certainly seems like the world is going a little crazy right now, and we'll be talking about that. Thank you very much for being here.
The world certainly is going crazy right now. So once the hearty handshakes were over, the two of them got to business. They spoke for about an hour. One of the things they discussed was NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a Western alliance, and it is worried because Donald Trump may pull the plug. He has criticized NATO members in the past, saying they don't pay their fair share. NATO guidelines are very clear. Every member should spend 2% of their GDP on defense. Most of them did not until recently, and Trump was not happy about this. And now that he's coming back, NATO countries have started paying up.
You sneaky
This
bastard.
alliance has 32 members. In 2023, only 10 of these members paid their dues, or their due, 2% of their GDP on defense. This year, that number has gone up to 23. So 20.
And you see why he threatened to pull out of NATO. It's like nobody's keeping their word in NATO. NATO didn't even keep their word to Russia. They said, think about it. Actually, NATO is just some dishonest people at this point. So you're telling me we ask these people to pay 2% of their GDP. Most of them don't do it. All right. Russia tells them don't approach, don't inch towards his border. I'm sorry, but Putin tells them don't inch towards his border. They do it. I mean, like, what type of disobedience is this? So what? Can NATO just run around and do whatever they want because they got the backing of America? Maybe if we take that out, they'll be a little bit more humble.
23 out of 32 NATO countries are now spending the requisite amount on their defense. Clearly, there's an improvement. Macron brought it up with Trump. And the response? NATO is good as long as they pay their bills. That's what Trump said. Probably not the reassurance that Macron was looking for, but it's better than nothing. After the bilateral, they were joined by a third participant, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Macron was initially supposed to meet Zelensky separately, but he decided to pull off a diplomatic coup. He staged the first meeting between Trump and Zelensky after Trump won the US election. The meeting did not last long, just about 20 minutes. But despite the brevity, Zelensky said it went well.
It was a very good meeting. It is important that it was constructive and the atmosphere was crucial.
Zelensky called the talks constructive. He called Trump resolute, as always. And he said they would continue to work together. So he was trying to project hope. But then Donald Trump himself spoke, first about the Syrian crisis and then about Ukraine. Let me quote from what he said about the war in Ukraine. There should be an immediate ceasefire and negotiation should begin. Too many lives are being so needlessly wasted. Too many families destroyed, and if it keeps going, it can turn into something much bigger and far worse. I know Vladimir well. This is his time to act. China can help. The world is waiting. So he urged Vladimir Putin to act now to bring about an immediate ceasefire and begin negotiations. What came next was even more interesting. As you heard, Trump said China can help. Not something that Zelensky and the West wanted to hear, because they accused China of being partisan, of supporting Russia in the war. They've sanctioned a number of Chinese firms for making weapons for Russia.
Well, dirt.
And now Trump says China can help end the war. It's interesting also because of Trump.
Let's be real. China's a savage. Like, who aren't they manufacturing for? Like, literally, who aren't they making like whatever for? Like, that's China. But I do get it, though. It is funny how Trump is kind of hitting them with the, yo, China, you can help. But I'm wondering, how could China help? What? Stop making weapons for Russia? Maybe.
Trump's own position, he is no fan of China. He is preparing for a trade war with them. He is threatening tariffs on Chinese imports, and yet he wants Beijing to step in to help
Wild.
stop the Ukraine.
It kind of sounds like that whole I'm gonna build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. It kind of sounds like that again. It's like, wait, what? Like, hold on. You're about to enter a trade war with them, but you went there helping stopping a war, but you're about to enter a trade war with them? Like, hold on now. But hey, man, my man's coming in with a new type of leverage, so let's see what he can get off.
Ukraine war. This might be a signal to Putin, an assurance that he won't be pressured by the West, that he may have a friendly face at the negotiating table. But will Putin accept this?